Hi, PSwipen here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about my impressioning quest. Mostly I'm going to focus on the way that I did the impressioning, the log that I impressioned, and I will talk a bit about other points of the impressioning techniques and other stuff that you might want to know to start your quest too. Obviously, I'm not a master impressionist or anything like that. I don't have enough experience. I only impressioned one log before this one, and I had a little bit of an idea of the pitting. So this one was my first blind impressioning, and it was a very hard log. I will link in the description to the channel of Rubber Band, which is a person that has much more experience than me in impressioning, and he explains some of the things that I'm going to talk about in this video. So, if you have any correction to anything that I'm going to say, please write in the comment section, and I will include any significant corrections in the description. First off, this is a Wilka 6-pin double euro lock, and it was sent to me by Moki, that kindly mentored me in this quest. He volunteered to send me this lock without key and plenty of blanks that I have significantly reduced the number of. I thank Moki for his help and his assistance for this quest, and to every other person that helped me to accomplish it. This is not a beginner lock. This is a lock that has quite good tolerances, and so every file that you make to the key might be too much if you are not careful. And that was a bit what stumped me about this impressioning from the start. I frequently overfiled keys, and as you can see, I have plenty of overfiled keys here and many broken ones. In addition, Moki got me many steel keys. So you can see they are steel and they are not easy to use for impressioning. Ideally, one should use brass keys. The problem is that I got few of them, but they were a bit too soft, and so they cracked and broke. And later I learned that this brand is not the best for impressioning. I was not very gentle with it, and at times I got angry, so I also cracked other steel keys. Fortunately, the pins of the lock are also steel, so they will mark on steel keys. So it's not impossible. If they were brass pins, it would be very difficult to impression using steel keys. Also, steel keys are not very good for the files, so I'll probably try not to use any more steel keys for future impressioning. I don't want to ruin my files. Now, I got also one very important thing, that was the impressioning handle. At first I was using a vice grip, those common ones that are used to lock and can be used for impressioning, but they are not very comfortable and they will wobble a little bit. So I bought this one from Rubber Band, he made those, and this was one of the last ones that came to Europe, and it works perfectly. I will talk a little bit more about this in the material section. Now, what concerns the material, there are a few important things that one should have. You should have a vise. This is not the best vise to have for impressioning. For lockpicking, it's very good, it is useful, it's perfect for most things. But for impressioning, it's not great because it's not stuck, it's not fixed, and so when you try to impression, this all wobbles a little bit. So the force that you are using on the handle is not going to be correctly transferred to the key and to the pins that are making the marks. So it will be a bit harder to use. There are a few ways that you can minimize that. Having a very stable surface, grabbing the vise while you do the impressioning, those are ways you can do that. You can still have good results, but it's not the best. Rubber Bands has some suggestions about that. You can go watch his channel and see what vices he uses. I had to use this one. Next, we have the files. I use Valorb files. I got lucky that the company sent me a number 2 round cut instead of number 4 that I asked, so they sent another one. So now I have a number 2 and a number 4. The difference about the number 2 and the number 4 is that the number 2 has a lower grit, so it will cut more and will cut faster. Number 4 will cut a little bit slower and it will leave a nicer and smoother surface to see the marks on. But you can impression with either one. I found in the later part of my quest that I could use number 2 for steel keys as well as number 4. And I use the number 4 for smoothing it out and for the last few parts of the impressioning. So they can both be used, they are very good. They can be bought online. Also, Grobe files are also good and readily available in the United States. Valorb are very much available in Europe and easy to find online. Also, device handle or the impressioning handle that Rubber Band made or modeled. It is a very good handle. It has some weight, but not too much, just enough so that the force that we give to it will have some impact on the key. It's very simple to use. It will require a little bit of work to attach to the key, but it's not hard to use. So just for show, I'm going to grab a blank here and we'll show how to attach. You can attach both this way or this way. You can choose how to do it. And I don't know if these are still available, probably not, but they are a good model if you want to make your own. And then just have to use these X keys. You don't have to put the key in a very symmetrical fashion because it has to be well stuck on the handle, and sometimes the screws will go into the hole of the key, so it's not ideal. So This way seems fine. And you set the other side too. Okay, so you have to make sure the key is well and doesn't move. Yeah, so you now have a key. Next, I have some sandpaper. I used 400 grit, that was what I had, but 600, 800 will work the same way. Just have to be a little bit more careful with the sandpaper when it's low grit. But for steel keys it works even better. So I use this one. It is used mostly for smoothing out the surface on top, removing the excess nickel. You can, or the coating of the keys. You can use the file to do that like this too, but in these kind of keys it's not that easy. So I used this. I will demonstrate how I did it before later. Also, I should add, you can have 1000 or 1200 grit sandpaper to smooth out the cuts that you make, to make them a little bit more shiny. If you have some doubtful scratches on them and you want to check if they appear again. Next, you need blanks, of course. I have these steel blanks that I showed you. There's one inside the handle. You can use brass blanks too. Some are better than others. I do not recommend JMA blanks. If you can choose another brand, please do. And I also have this needle file as a flat needle file. It is necessary because sometimes, let me see if I can show you. I don't have many. Okay, I have this one here, so you can see sometimes these values here are very high, and there's a risk when they go too low that the pin gets stuck there when going in or out, when the key goes in or out of the lock. So what you should do is start filing this top sharp angles so that the pin can go through the key with no problem. So for example, in this case, I will just pick the key and I would do like this, making it very stable, and then it would be a bit more flat. This is the one here. And I would have to do the same to this one, for example, and to this one. Okay, so this is useful for that reason. And it is also useful as helping to prepare the blade of the key that I will show next. Now let me see optics. Now the other thing that you should have is something to use as a magnifier. I did not use an external optics per se, but I used my cell phone, this thing here, okay? And I use an app magnifier that I can keep the light on, and I magnify it for 5-6 times, even more if I can, that it gets a bit grainy after 6. And I could see the marks very well. In the end of the video, I will leave a little bit of space to show you some of the best pictures that I took of markings during impressioning. One of the most important things that one should do as you start the impressioning is to prepare the blade of the key, of the blank. As you can see, the top of the blank is covered with paint or nickel or whatever, and it's rough and will not help you see the marks. So you have to remove that top. It is fairly easy to do on a brass key, but it's not as easy to do on this one. So I use a fairly low grit sandpaper for that, and I'll demonstrate how I do it. So I take a little bit and I use this flat file and just go at it. Now I check and see, still has a little bit to take off. I change side. I tried once to use the impressioning file, but it's not very easy to do on these keys. So I didn't want to ruin them, and so I kept doing like this. It takes a little bit more to do, so it's coming out a bit more nicely. It still has a few marks there, but it's almost done. Focus more on the tip. Yeah, now it's much better. You can further increase the shine of this blade by using a higher grit paper, like 1200 for example. You can take just a little bit of this, and now just make it shine a little bit. So much better. It still has some marks there, so I think I'll just put a little bit more effort with the 400. If you don't have a small flat file like this, you can use a large one, or you can use a piece of flat wood, for example. This was the best technique that I saw online on other videos to do it, so, and it worked fine. Let me see. Yeah, it's a bit better. Now for the shine. You can use 1000, 2000, whatever. It just needs to be clean and without scratches, so you can see the first marks at least. Yeah. So let me check this. Yeah, might be enough. Sometimes I use also the 2000 just to shine it up a little bit. Yeah. So now that the blade is prepared, I'm going to get the first marks. Some people also do one thing that is making this blade thin. I don't recall what it's called. Supposedly it will make it easier to get marks. I don't think that's equal for all locks. I prefer not to do that or risk ruining the experience. So now, how do you get positioning marks for the pins? The way I learned from rubber band is that you put the key in and just wiggle it around a little bit. And now you should have, let me see if it's visible here. Yep, you have the marks. You can count 6. There. And now you know where the pins are. Now this might change a little bit once you start filing, and you might have to adjust the position because sometimes you are not filing perfectly straight. But this is a general position of the pins in the lock. And this is where the key should have the cuts. So the blade is very well cleaned, so you can see all the marks for the position of the pins. Now, there are a few things that must be done. First thing is, once you have the markings of the position of the pins, you should make a small groove on their places. This will help you with knowing where to file when you get the marks. So you should pick file and look at where the markings are. Position your hand, just put this, okay, position your hand so that you can file perfectly straight in that direction, always forward with the file, okay, always from back to forward. Do not go forward to back, it will ruin the shine that you want from filing. And make sure you are marking on, you are filing on the marks that you made by wiggling the key. Let me do that and I'll show you. So what I did here, I filed a little bit off the top, and I can make them just a little bit deeper, just to the first cut, but I shouldn't risk too much. So this is fine, I found. And with this we can try to find the markings that will appear, hopefully, let me see, inside those more shiny areas. Okay, and I will see if I can show you that right after I tell you how to do the impression. For impressioning, you have various techniques that you can use. The most simple one that you can use is to just insert the key, and then you can wiggle around from one side to the other. You can do two things: lower your key and wiggle, and then push it up and wiggle. These will generate marks, but it's not as easy to have them, at least not in a steel key. But you can do it. There are some people that only do this mostly, and they have success impressioning various locks. I don't know if there's anything here. Yeah, probably Probably not. Still, there are other things that you can do. Another way, this one is the one that Rubber Band usually uses and he teaches, is that you insert the key, then you do one of two things. You lower the key, turn, and then wiggle up and down a few times, and then you can hold the key up, lift the pins, turn, and do the same. And now you do the other way around too. So low, turn, and up, turn. Now usually I don't do it like this. Usually I pick this hand like this and I push this way, or I push the other way, and I just wiggle with this hand. I'm just showing the technique, but it's more comfortable if you do it like this. Also more effective. Okay, so this will probably be much better if you use both hands to wiggle. Or like this. Okay, same thing. Let me see if I can get anything. I wasn't using a lot of force, so probably not. There might be a mark or two, but that's not really the objective to show you to mark right now. What I'm going to show you next is the final key. But before we finish the techniques, there are a few other things that people can do to get marks. Some people say that in higher tolerances locks, it might not be very good to do this lifting of the pins. And so what some of them suggest is just leave the key rested, relaxed, turn, and then up and down, and then the other way around, up and down, up and down. So do not push down the key or push up the key before wiggling. It hasn't worked for me. So the time that I did open the lock, I was using Rubber Band's technique, but it's some people find it very much find it more useful to use one technique over another, so you should try for yourself. Other things that might be useful to get marks is to use some contrast to enhance the marks. One thing that can be done is using a marker, like a Sharpie or another dark marker, that you can paint the top of the key, the blade of the key, and then when you do the wiggling, there will be marks on that painting that will have no paint. Those are the places where the pins were binding, and those are the places you should file. The other way to do this is using soot. Soot can be made with a lighter, with something that causes a flame and makes some soot appear on the blade, and then you do the same impressioning, and the places where the soot disappears are the places where the key has hit with more binding force, and those are the places you should file. I have not tried any of those techniques, so I cannot say if they would work here or not. Now, other things that you might want to do is use a higher grit paper, like the 1200 or 1000, and when you have marks that are not very obvious and you have some doubts, you can sand them a little bit, make the the cut smooth again, and then you can do another try and see if they appear again. So that will help to distinguish true marks from not so true marks, or marks that shouldn't be counted as filing places. Another thing that you should do is to try to file only one cut at a time. So if you have multiple marks, either you clean those other marks and just focus on the stronger one, or you can just go after the stronger one in every attempt and then go back to the other marks that appear meanwhile. Or you can start filing another mark if it becomes much stronger. For demonstration purposes, I'm using an old brass key that I used, and I will show you how one should file, what's the proper technique, as far as I know. And let's see if you can see. I'm trying to make it visible for you. So, as I told you before, one way to align is to put your finger near the groove you are going to file, and try to use the file perpendicular to the key, so you are not filing like this nor like this. Also, you should be filing in a way that makes the groove perfectly horizontal in this direction, so it's not slanted either to one way or to another. So you should not file like this, like lifted, or like this, but perfectly straight. So I'm going to show you more or less what you should do. So you should have the key blank supported and fixed in a way that it doesn't move as you file. So you have to use a little bit of force to keep it straight, and then make sure you are straight and file forward with some speed and some pressure. At first you should in higher cuts use only part of the file, only a little bit, and then as you go down you can start to use more of the file, so it will file a bit of the sides too. This will prevent the canyoning that we talked about, to make the sides too high for the pins to pass. Still, you should be aware that you have to continuously check if they are too high and file them down if needed. So in this case I can use just a little bit more of the file and just go like this. Now the amount of times that you will file will depend on the measures of the pins of the lock you are impressioning. When you don't know, you try to file less at each time. When you know, you can use more. Rubber band suggests that as long as you keep the same tension for filing, so you have to have some tension on your file, and you are not using too much strength, and you keep it straight, you can file 3-4 times each time and it will be okay. But you have to test, you have to see what works for you, and you file less if you're not as sure, and more if you know you can do it. So just like this. Doing it straight will ensure that when you go and check the cut, you have, let's see if I can focus, a shinier surface where a pin can bind and mark again. If you don't have a straight filing surface or filed surface, you might have some trouble knowing where the mark is. So I use a little bit more force, and let me show what happens if you do this in a non-straight way. So what happens is that you have two surfaces there. Okay, so it will be much harder to know where the mark is, and also if you try to make it straight next time, it might be too much. So you have to be very careful. Try to keep it as straight as possible, and not cause these divisions. It is pretty hard to keep it always straight. Sometimes it happens, but try to resist the temptation of making it straight if you do this mistake. Okay, so you don't overfile. Another thing that will happen is that if you are in a vicious position like this, for example, and the key is on its side, or you have tendency to lift your arm, you can effectively have a straight surface, but it's slanted. So you can have it this way. So it is a straight surface, but it is slanted. Not much, but it is a little bit slanted. So try to keep it as horizontal, as perpendicular to the key as possible, so you can have a nice surface for marking. Okay, so fast straight cuts, keep it straight, and afterwards you can mark again your key. It's easier to file, as you can see, when you already have a groove, because you don't need the finger there to keep it straight. On higher cuts though, you might need the finger to keep it straight, and you might have to use less pressure at first, so you're sure you do not deviate from the line. Okay, just until you make a little deeper groove. Okay, so this is my suggestion, at least, because I noticed that difficulty before. One thing that will inevitably happen is that you have a cracked or broken key. You'll have to transfer the cuts. So if you are fairly certain that the cuts are correct and you have cracked the key, you will not want to risk that, that the key breaks. So you will want to transfer those cuts to a new blank. If the key is just cracked, then you can grab another blank. I'm going to use these steel keys as an example. Of course, you should be using brass keys if possible. So you have a cracked key here, and the way that I used to transfer the cuts was to tape together the keys. So I put some tape around the keys in a way that it would be perfectly on top one of another. And the important parts are that the low part is together there, straight one above the other, and the shoulders are exactly in front of one another. This is easier if the blanks are exactly the same model. You can also check from uh, the, the part behind if it's perfectly straight, and you tape them together to help with the cuts. If you do it well, the markings that you have made on the blank will align with the cuts that you have made on the previous key. Now, the problem is when you have a broken key, you will not be able to transfer the cuts from the broken section of the key, like this, for example, to another brass key directly, because it will not be easy to put them in a way that you can file together. So you'll have to do it by sight. You'll have to see more or less where the cuts are and file them on the blank, on the new blank. Another thing that you should do is to leave a bit of space between the cuts that you have made before and the new cuts that you are making on the new blank. So you should not file all the way until the cut that you made. You should leave a little bit of space. This I found was best for two reasons. One is that that way you can correct if there's a slight deviation of the groove. When you try to make the mark, you can have the mark in another place, so you have time to adjust. And the other is so that you do not overfile without unwillingly. So in this case, you should always leave just a little bit of space between the old cuts and the new cuts. Also, if you are not completely sure that you haven't overfiled somewhere, then you should leave more space, more interval between the old cut and the new cut. That way, that will give you more space, so you can correctly cut to the correct height. Let's go to the final key that I got for this lock. So this was the final beating, and as you can see, there are fairly low cuts on 1, 2, and 3, the medium one on 4, and 2 high cuts on 5 and 6. I kept overfiling probably on 5 and 6, and I had some problems with the keys, so it took me a while to manage to impression. I have a sort of a graveyard of keys here, but I managed to do it last night, so it does turn. It turned well. It's not turning very well now, right now, because of the cam that it's stuck inside, but it goes one side and the other. I did some cleaning. There are still some marks appearing sometimes, so I might have to file them a little bit more, but it does work. Now, the problem is that I was a bit rough in the beginning, and so probably I smashed a few pins, because the way that it opens in one side and the other is a bit different. This one is a bit more smooth than the other side, so my guess is I smashed some pins. And so there are pins that are slightly shorter on one side than the other, so it doesn't rotate exactly the same way on one side and the other. And as I cleaned the key to use it better on one side, it started turning worse on the other one. Still, successful impressioning, next time I will know better, and we'll probably use less force and be less angry about it. When you finish your impression, you have your first turn. There's a chance that there is still at least one pin whose cut is not at the correct height and just slightly higher still. So when that happens, it will leave a bigger mark. And if you have a big mark, especially in a brass key, you can have something that is called a crater. And those craters are just a signal that you only need to clean it a little bit more so that they are at the correct size. So you just pick up your file and just lightly take off a little bit from the top and try again until the crater disappears and no longer marks. This didn't make a crater per se, but it made some of the stronger marks at the end. So I could see where the pins were almost at the cut height, at the correct cut height. And that was it. This was my impressioning quest, my first blind impression lock, and I'll probably impression more locks as long as I find a few more to impression. Once again, thank you to Moki, to Rubberband, to NKT for his keys, and to all other people that helped me and suggested that some techniques, some improvements to my technique. And hope you enjoyed watching, and see you later.